So overlays can get your game from looking like this to looking like this. It's a subtle change, but it can give a nice little bit of decoration rather than having these massive black bars on either side of the screen. Let's get started. Okay, so firstly, all these overlays are for RetroArch. So we'll have to go into RetroArch, but once we've set them in RetroArch, when we access the games from our front ends, they'll show perfectly. So for the purposes of this video, I'll be using the Watomsk overlay pack. I believe it's pronounced, so apologies if that's incorrect. We're going to download that first. So we'll go to Chrome. So this is the Watomsk overlays pack. So the link for this will be in the description. So they're all broken down into zip folders. There's also these Watomsk ones at the bottom. There's a 1080p and a 720p one. So this is for if you want to have all of them. However, I'm not going to do that because for specific systems like the PSX, for example, or the Dreamcast, I emulate them in external apps, not within RetroArch, so it'd be a bit pointless. So you can download whichever ones you want. They're all the same files, just organized slightly differently. So for the purposes of today, I'm going to get the Game Boy. So we'll tap into that and we'll just press the little download button. I'm also going to get the Game Boy Advance because that has a couple of extra steps that we're going to cover as well. Ooh, I copied it, didn't mean to do that. And do one more, we'll do the NES. There we go. Now we've done that, the first thing we're going to need to do is unzip those folders. So for this, I use Solid Explorer, which is a file explorer with a built-in extraction. It's easier to use than the stock Android file explorer. However, we are also going to have to use the stock Android file explorer, and I'll explain why shortly. So firstly, let's get them extracted. So I'm going to go into my downloads folder, select all, I'm going to tap these three buttons, and I'm going to extract them. It'll only take a second. There we go. So if you see in here, there's some PNGs and some config files. You need to make sure you have both of them for it to work in RetroArch. So you can get rid of the zip folders, keep your downloads nice and tidy. So what we want to do is move them over to the RetroArch internal data folder. Because of Android's permissions, we can't do that using a third-party file explorer, which is why we have to go back to the stock Android file explorer, unfortunately. I'm going to swipe up, I go to Files. So there's my folders, and then I'm going to press and hold. I'm just going to select those. I'm going to press my three dots on the top. I'm going to press Move To. Now it's going to ask us where we want to move it to. So I'm going to tap this little hamburger menu at the top left. So if you scroll down on the left-hand side, you can see I've got these apps here. So this is those app data folders that we don't have access to in Solid Explorer or another third-party file explorer. Very annoying. Hopefully this is something that can be updated with Android later on. It's probably something you can achieve if you rooted the device. However, I've not yet done that myself. So if you're an expert in that, then you can follow that process. You'll also notice as well that I have two installations of RetroArch. This is to do with the Pokemon trading guide that I put out recently. So all it is just two installations of RetroArch, but most of you, I imagine, will have the one with the ARch 64. That's the one that's part of the Obtainium pack. So we'll use that one. That's my main one. We'll tap into that. So this is all the RetroArch data. So this overlays folder, going to tap into there, and I'm going to press Move. We'll give that a moment. You can see they're disappearing. There we are. So now that's moved over, we go into RetroArch. So the best way I've found to do this is we're going to load a game. We're going to test the layout, make sure it looks okay. Once we're happy with it, we're going to save that as a configuration file, and then that will apply to everything for that system. So what I like to do for this is I like to use playlists. So if we come down to playlists, So what a playlist is, it's just a list of games, the same as it will be in any front end. We're going to go to import content. We're going to scan a directory, go to mine or my internal storage. We're going to find our ROMs folder. So first we'll do Game Boy. B. We'll scan this directory. Shouldn't take too long, maybe 5 seconds or so. Obviously, it's all dependent on how many games you've got. I'm also going to do the same again for GBA. We'll scan that directory. And then we'll also, was it NES? NES was the other one I had, so we'll do NES as well. Okay, there we go. So now if we back right out and we scroll across, you'll now see that there is a Game Boy tab, a Game Boy Advance tab, and an NES tab. So this is just a nice, easy way to access the games directly within RetroArch rather than through a front end. This is solely for the purpose of just setting them up. So I'm going to boot up Amazing Tater. The first time you boot it up, it's going to ask you to select a core to associate with that. I have already done that, so it should just boot. Oh, it's going to ask me anyway. So you can use Gambate or MGBA. For Game Boy, I use Gambate. So, or what you can do is set a core association here, but it's the same thing essentially. So now we'll run the content. You can see here, just the screen, there's no overlays currently. So what we want to do is access the menu. So if you followed my setup guide, the way I access the menu is I hold my select button, my hotkey button, and I press X. And there we go, we've got our quick menu. What we want to do, come down to on-screen overlay. We want to display the overlay. By default, you might see the auto load preferred overlay is ticked. If you leave this on, it will keep loading the on-screen touch controls, which we don't want because we've got a lovely built-in controller. So make sure that's turned off. So for my overlay preset, I'm going to select into this. So this will take us to that overlays folder. So as you can see, I've got 2 Game Boys folder because I was testing it before. So we'll go into Game Boy. So with this pack in particular, we've got Game Boy, GB, Game Boy Color, GBC, or Game Boy Pocket. And then there's these G ones, which are the same, but the logo is grayscale. So if you prefer a more minimalist, subtle approach, you can use those. I'm just going to stick with the standard Game Boy for this one, like that. Now, as you can see in the background, you can see that overlay is already applied. The reason that's already applied is because I've enabled Show Overlay Behind Menu. So that's an option you can enable as well, which I advise doing because at least you can see that it's definitely applied. Also, I believe the default opacity is 0.7. For these types of overlays, because they're only at the sides, I bump them up to the full 1. However, if you've got some that have a bit more of perhaps a shader-like feel, where I know that for some of the arcade ones that I was testing on my PC a couple of years ago, it was like it was looking in the arcade cabinet. So for them, you want the opacity so you can actually see the game behind it. Otherwise, it'd be quite difficult. We'll leave that unchecked. Don't need to do any of these. Make sure auto rotate and auto scale is on. Then all we need to do, if we come back out, and then we want to go to overrides. So what these are, I'll just remove the ones I did before. So these are basically the first choice options. So normally with RetroArch, you'll set your config up and it'll have a default option. If you want to go to the next level and say if it's a Game Boy game or if it's a specific core, use these options. So currently the active one is Game Boy one, which I had before. So if you want to save it game specific, for example, if you've got 100 million different game specific overlays, you'd use this option. If you wanted a specific core, so say you wanted one core to have the overlays, one core to not, or however you'd want to organize it, you can use the core overrides. For me, I'm just going to use the content directory. So that's everything in that GB ROMs folder will have this applied. So I'm going to save that. And as you can see, you get a little pop-up at the bottom that just says it's saved successfully. So there we are. I'm also, just to be sure, going to go to my config file and save my current configuration. So overrides are active, so it won't let me do that. So that should be okay. So what I'm going to do now is go back to my quick menu. I'm going to close Amazing Tater. And then I'm going to pick another random game. We'll go for Burger Time. We'll run that. Again, it'll ask me for the core. If you want to assign a core per system automatically, what you can do is if you go back to your playlists, select the playlist. Or go to playlists on your settings, manage your playlists, and then Game Boy. And in here, you can see default core, and then you can select it. So I'll go, oh, where's it go? It is. Now, if I go back over to, we'll do Castlevania. It won't ask me, and we can see that the overlays are there. So that's it for Game Boy. So for Game Boy Advance, it's a little bit different because of the way the overlay is on the bottom as well. So I'll show you how we deal with those. So I'm going to quit out Castlevania, close the content there. And then just whilst I'm here, I'm going to enable, manage my playlists, and I'm going to enable the default core to be MGBA inside the Game Boy Advance folder. And I'm going to save that config file. So now, because I've not got a game loaded and it's not using the overrides, the config file will now save. So let's load up a game. We'll do Advanced Wars just because it's there. So as you can see, because I've enabled the overlays, it's automatically defaulted to touchscreen controls, which I don't want. So I'm going to go to my menu and go down to my on-screen overlay. So I want to display the overlay. I don't want to auto-load the preferred overlay. My preset, I'm going to select Game Boy Advance, and I'm going to stick with, obviously they've got all sorts of different ones. There's Classic, there's the grey alternate ones, the SP ones. I think I'll just stick with good old Classic GBA. Again, the opacity is 1. We'll show the overlay behind the menu. Then we'll untick hide behind menu. So you can see there it has put the overlay on, but if you notice, it's kind of cut the image off a little bit. So we'll fix that shortly. Then we'll go to overrides, and then we'll save content directory. So this will apply to all Game Boy Advance games. Again, if you'd rather have it to specific games or specific cores, use those options accordingly. So we'll back out of that. So this is what it looks like now. So you can see it's cutting off quite a lot of the image there. What we need to do to fix this, and this is listed on the Watomsk GitHub page if you do forget. So you can go back to the menu, and then what we're going to do is go back to our video scaling, which is in our video settings. We go to scaling. So we need to enable integer scale. And you'll see that it's already kind of zoomed out the image. And now we want to make sure that the scale axis is on the Y. And we're going to need to set this viewpoint anchor bias. So if you look in the background, I don't know how well it will show up, but you can see if I move this, the image is moving up and down. We want to set this to 0.05. So that will raise the image up, but without cutting off the image at the bottom. Because obviously the logo's on the bottom, but it's not on the top. So there we are. So now if I go back out, you can see that it fits in that frame. And then last but not least, what I'll do is I'll have a look at the NES one. So let's go to our quick menu. Let's close out of this. And then let's go for Adam's Family. And then we'll run it. Obviously, I forgot to set the core, so we'll run it again. And again, it's defaulted back to that touchscreen controls. We'll go to our menu, go to our overlay. We won't load the preferred. Change it to NES one. And we'll just go for the standard one. Again, have a play around, see which one you prefer. Just for demonstration purposes, I'll be using this one. There we go. Show it behind the menu. We won't hide it in the menu. Then you can see it's quite faint, but you can see it in the back. I back out. before I do that, save the override. There we go. So if I back out, we've got a lovely little power button in the bottom left, and also we've got this little NES logo at the side. I do like having a bit of colour. There are grayscale versions, but it does add something. You can get some overlays which basically look like CRT TVs, which are really cool. There is absolutely all sorts out there. So this sets it at the RetroArch level. So what I'm going to do, if I fully close RetroArch, no one boots straight into RetroArch. I'm not mad. I go through ESDE. So if I decide, oh, I want to play some, what have I got? Play some Castlevania. So this will pass it off to RetroArch, but because those RetroArch options have already been enabled, you can see the overlay is there. So that was just a very simple guide on how overlays work. I'm not sure if there are any other emulators which they work for. I know there's quite a lot on PC. I've not had a look into the Android stuff, but for RetroArch, this is how you do it. If this helps you out, I'd appreciate a like and a subscribe. Tell your friends, and I'll see you next time.